What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Attack on Top 10. Today we're hitting up the two drops, the best two drops across the entire game, both in power and relevance during their meta and the impact that they've had on the game. A couple of ground rules if you have not watched the first video. We are not doing any banned or limited cards. No cards that have the super combo trait, that's going to be its own list. No cards with counters, that will also be its own list. Um, and we'll just get right into it with number 10. We got Vegeta Time Regulator. So this card was kind of a stepping stone for the game for making a pure utility card where you set this card on build and this card becomes a kind of an engine of itself that interacts with your deck and boosts the consistency of it tenfold. So while this card is only seen play in really one deck, and that being Toa running the Mira package, this card was kind of integral to it to boost the consistency and make it so you weren't relying on luck, that you were relying more so on your player's skill. So this card was not the most powerful in terms of battle, but it was powerful in making a deck more powerful and become a basis and built on what we call utility cards in today's meta.
And I just remember anecdotally when I joined this game, you and I and a couple other of our locals went up to a regionals, and this was one of the cards that was given out to everybody as part of the attendance prize.
Mhm.
And despite that, this card was so expensive at the time that I paid for my trip up there by selling mine at the event.
Exactly. Uh,
I also think the Vegeta Time Regulator also marked the first step towards Black getting its own identity in
mhm.
the game. Like we had Overwhelm, but Overwhelm had always felt like just an auxiliary for other decks to use. I mean, we had gotten the Demigod deck, and I think there was a Mirror Leader out of set three and stuff like that. But Time Regulator was really the first instance where it was like, holy crap, this is meant to be used in a deck that fully supplements the strategy that Black wants to perform. And you're absolutely right as far as it being its own self-contained engine. It's just an important card.
Oh yeah, you couldn't play Toa without it.
No.
Exactly.
Up next, we've got number 9, Goku Black, Unforeseen Darkness. So this, along with
Whoops, whoops,
the
whoops, whoops.
the two drop Brawly, was released as I think it was a participation for, was it the set 7 sealed tournament?
I believe so. I believe that is
Yeah,
correct.
I believe. But this card, the Brawly never took picked up. But this card, while it never saw exactly like fringe play over the course of any meta, it did have a spot in the blue yellow Brawly 8 deck. Because for 2 energy, you got to restand one of your energy at the end of the turn. You got to discard a card and draw 2 cards. So for 2 energy, it was an effective 1 cost that also netted you an additional plus in your hand. You got to swing, and it was really one of those cards that helped solidify multicolor strategies as the top of the game at that point. And I really attribute this card, and supported by the fact of how expensive this card has been. Even now, we're still probably a year and a half out, and the card for a relatively irrelevant promo for today's meta, these cards are still 18 to $24 each. The cards are just important for that blue yellow strategy early on. And while they don't necessarily define that multicolor strategy now, they were absolutely pivotal towards getting it kicked off the ground in the early stages.
And at our number 8 spot, we got Chapelle the Iron Drake. So this card was released in the Divine Multiverse draft box. Did not see a lot of murmurings about this card early on, but once we got decks that were able to facilitate uh, the Unite Assemble package into Chapelle, really got to the top of the list meta wise. While having a very simple effect of when your opponent attacks, tapping down their energy energy hate is very rare in this game in terms of tapping it down. We did see that early on in the U6 meta around set 7, but really not much up until that point, up until this point. Um, but again, this is a card that is not your attacker. You're not putting this out here to deal damage. You're putting it out there to be a utility, to force your opponent to play around something. And there's not a lot of that in Dragon Ball TCG, which makes this card really interesting, really fun to play with and against. With it being yellow, facilitated in the U9 Assemble package, it was perfect match made in heaven for Mecha Frieza, and has established and put a deck in top meta. All of these pieces floating around that have accumulated into a very powerful list. It really, there's not much else to say about this card. It's not a difficult card to remove. It is just a fantastic piece to put out, and it becomes the center of attention for your opponent to play around. Just very interesting card all around, and its simplicity alone is what makes it good.
Chapelle, to me, ushered in a new life for yellow, because we got this during Draft Box 2 with Universe 9 Assemble, Row, Basil Fatal Rampage, the 5-drop Gamo that taps 2 energy. This just bred new life into yellow for me. This was really the time in the game that I really found my love for yellow, and Chapelle is in the center of that.
Oh, I'm also a yellow boy, yellow frog, whatever you want to call it. And what was I going to say? The reason this card stands out so much to me is that yellow is really heavy on rest mode effects, and forcing your opponent, excuse me, to spend all of their energy before attacking makes them really telegraph their turn, and just makes every rest mode effect and flying Nimbus in your hand that much better.
Next, we've got number 7, shared by 2 cards. We've got Saiyan Teamwork Kaba and Unstoppable Ambition Super Saiyan Khalifa. So the Khalifa was introduced in the Crossworld Set 3 booster set. The Kaba was released as a promo around that time, maybe a little bit before. The reason that these guys are on here is, I would say these are 2 members of one of the most notorious early decks in the game. I mean, around that time we had Mecha Frieza Apes, and then you had veggies, like Mecha Frieza veggies. Basically, there was no cohesiveness between archetypes, or between cards within an archetype, that Kaba and Khalifa, they're really the first set of cards to display that synergy as far as, how they work together. You play the Kaba, you search your top 10, you play the Khalifa. The Khalifa prevents you from blowing your stuff up with Kale. If you had 2 Kabas on the field, you could play Khalifa for free. I mean, there just never been synergy amongst cards like this before. And this was a fantastic archetype, even up to, I remember people were still playing this around set 8. They were playing it in the red-green Veggie Universe 6 package.
And it's not exactly a pro for the card, but this was one of the first times that we've seen a promo issue in this game. Saiyan Teamwork Kaba being a promo, it was the chase card, it was the card to get, and it was for a very powerful deck that many players wanted to play. So this card was at a high price very early on, and was one of really the first chase cards that we've seen outside of, set secret rares and SPRs. And we are even seeing this today with various promos that are very, very expensive. They're integral to a deck that a lot of people are interested in playing. So not exactly a pro for the card, but it's something to note, and has had an effect on this game. And at number 6, we got Ribrianne, PP, Ribrianne, Punishing Passion, whatever you would like to call this card. This card is either your favorite card or the bane of your existence.
PP, laugh.
I know you would like that one, Fluff.
Yeah.
But this card could really be any energy cost. because you're never playing this card for its actual energy cost. You're playing it for its effect. It just happens to be a 2-drop, and it had to be on this list because of the power that this card can hold within itself. So this card does not require you to put it on field. It requires you to have it in your drop area. It's very difficult to interact with this card unless you're playing an archetype, as in Shroom and Saucer, Mecha Gabora, or if you run stuff like Toa Twisted Sister to deal with your opponent's drop area, which is very niche. So it makes this card pretty much uninteractable in a majority of matchups, where your opponent can just tap 2 at any time or any time during their main phase and cause you to discard 2 cards. And losing cards out of your hand advantage is fantastic in this game. You always want to have hand advantage over your opponent, and any time that your opponent can, with zero loss of their hand, can just tap 2 energy and cause you to lose your hand, it's fantastic. We don't see a lot of green at top table. A lot of players tend to think green is on the weaker end, but these hand control strategies are very, very potent, and it's due to cards like this that are uninteractable.
Especially in best of one.
In best of one, hand control is one probably the strongest in my opinion, because if you get an opponent that hasn't played the hand control matchup ad nauseum, you can just steamroll them because they can't play the game.
You haven't seen a green deck rip, 12 to 14 cards out of a player's hand in a turn. You haven't really seen what green can do. And part of that is because of Ribrianne. Just over the course of a game, setting up the drop area, tapping 2 energy to get 2 cards out of the hand, 2 energy to get 2 cards out of the hand. And like this card, there's not been many cards that function the way that Ribrianne do. And you'll see another card later on the list that I would consider to be the brother card of Ribrianne. But Ribrianne is really... everyone was really excited for this card. And don't sleep on it. This card is fantastic. Coming in at number 5, we've got Zarbon, Cosmic Elite. This was one of the high chase promos around the set 10 Rise of the Unison Warrior. This card was a must-have for anyone that was running a green type strategy, whether you were running Gotenks or you were running an earlier Cell variant or any other early green strategy. Zarbon Cosmic Elite is a recurrent. It almost reminds me of like Sinister Serpent from old school Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just like it comes back over and over and over again, unless your opponent has the ability to warp it out. Plus, not only is it reoccurring for you, every time it gets removed by battle, like when you activate Blocker and it gets KO'd, your opponent has to drop a card out of their hand. So it's not one of those types of cards that you use once, it's a one and done. Once your opponent sees Zarbon Cosmic Elite, it is going to continue to be a factor and round off an entire game for the rest of the game after they see.
And there's a lot of drop area synergies in green. There's green cards that make you discard your cards. Cards like Frieza's Army Healing Pod that will actually add a card to your hand when you play this card from your drop area with the Activate main.
Yeah.
Also, a interesting thing about Zarbon is kind of the promo redemption arc that this card had, where initially it was prohibitively expensive, what I like to call a car payment card, and it has been given multiple, let me see if they're actually on this page, they are not, but it has been given multiple printings and arts, all of which have been
three reprints.
all of which have been promos, but it has been printed so often that the distribution has brought the price on this card down to now where anybody can have it. If you're not too picky about which art variant you own, which I think is a great place for a promo to be.
And we mentioned earlier on the list that this game does have a promo problem. This is the best way Bandai has ever handled a promo, because the reprints did come a little bit later than most would have liked, but they were still there and they were in abundance. Everybody that wants this card can have this card now. If you go to your local shop, if you're lucky enough to have a shop that runs Dragon Ball, they probably have spare promos of Zarbon lying around.
I liked Anniversary Box for distributing old promos too, but I totally agree.
Coming in number 4, we got Scrambling Assault Son Goten.
What a
So
way to change the game.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So if this was recorded a couple months ago, we wouldn't have this card on the list because this was the first card to come off of the banned list. Uh, this card, if you're not familiar with it, this come out as a BCC promo, which Bandai does not do anymore. I kind of wish they did because we got a lot of really cool cards through this system.
You mentioned in the Zarbon discussion how you felt like Zarbon's reprint's the best way they've handled a promo. I feel like the BCC participation promos were the best way to do it. Because you got a specific promo for a certain period, for like a 6-week period. So every event you went to, you got one of those promos. And it just made, they were always cheap. Like, Scrambling Assault Goten was never an expensive card.
I remember around the time that I got my playset, they were about $5 each, which is kind of where a promo needs to be. It still needs to be a chase. You need to have incentive to have people show up at a shop to get them.
Yep.
But also not too expensive that it's shunning out other players.
Yep.
But this card enabled one of the most degenerate strategies this game has ever had. Some people even claimed that this archetype, this strategy killed the game for them, which that is the 1/2 swap storm. You pair this with Bardock the Progenitor, you get a two attacks for 1 energy, strike a life, and you get a search top 3 for any card.
Yep.
It didn't matter.
We still had Unyielding Spirit Trunks at 4. We had Flute at 4. We had Sensubin at 4. The ability to just make a continuous play was unmatched.
This card, it fixed everything that you needed. It gave you aggression. It gave you consistency. It fixed your hand. It was probably one of the most overtuned cards in the game.
Yeah.
It would... I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say that as soon as this card came off the ban list, players started experimenting with it, myself included. I used it in a Gotenks swap deck, and it was very potent in that, especially because since you can search the top 3 for any card, you don't have to reveal that card to your opponent, and you can advantage that knowledge gap a little bit.
And you can actually run this card in some interesting setups where I've been experimenting with running a 1/2 swap package with the Grandpa Gohan blocker that swap to into Goten. Just for consistency purposes in decks where I can only run like a one of secret rare that I have to have as my win con. It's a very potent package, and it's so compact and it's so energy efficient that it's unrivaled when it comes to searching and consistency.
Really, the existence of Scrambling Assault Goten, I really feel is the reason that we had decks like U3 Vegex, Shenron Gogeta. Like, it's because of a card like Scrambling Assault Goten that people started looking at the game in a different light. Like, oh, this isn't just a tempo style game where I spend 1 on turn 1, 2 on turn 2, 3 on turn 3. There's a way to actually abuse and find combos that create advantages for you. And people started putting in a lot more work to finding those different types of advantages. And I personally attribute it to Scrambling Assault Goten. Coming in at number 3 from the Rise of the Unison Warrior booster set 10, we've got Mecha Gabora, the Broken Sill. This 3-drop really changed the way that you have to approach side decking. The real equivalent to me would be Prohibition for any of you Yu-Gi-Oh players. You play it, you get to call a character name, you get to call an energy cost, and then it locks your opponent out. This is the type of card that just rewards game knowledge. If you know what your opponent's playing and you've studied the matchups and you play a well-timed Mecha Gabora, the Broken Seal, can shut your opponent down and buy you the time that you need. And there had never been a card like this that truly rewarded match knowledge beyond like just being an effective, efficient card. This card just really it really rewards a skilled practice player.
I've always been a massive fan of this card. I think I would love to see more cards of this type where it rewards a skilled player, and this card's power, it gets exponentially more powerful depending on how well you know your matchups and what you know your opponent is playing. So to a lower skilled player, they can understand what this card does. They can use it for its activate main and get some value out of its auto. But a skilled player with good matchup knowledge, with a well-timed, like Fluff said, not to be redundant, a well-timed Mecha Gabora can change the tide of a game. And
I think that's why this card didn't creep any higher than third on our list, because the power level of it really is limited by whoever is wielding it. So it can only be as good of a card as you are a player.
And at number 2, we got Piccolo Jr., Eradicator of Peace. This card just has way too many effects for the energy that it's at. For 2 energy.
It should be 4 energy on this card. Oh my god.
It would still be busted.
Yeah. So we've seen Alliance in the past and very strong Alliance cards, but we've never seen a card so tuned as Piccolo Jr. The amount of value that you get off of this card is absurd. And if we even pair it with other cards that are also on this list, like Zarbon Cosmic Elite, this is a fantastic Alliance target for this card, because for 1 energy, you can play that card from the drop rate. If your opponent removes it, it just goes back to the drop rate and you get to play it again. So you pretty much have a permanent Alliance target always ready to go for cheap after you've already paid 2 energy for such a cheap card. And for it being a 16k double striker just out of the gate, fantastic for 2 energy. You could run like Saiyan Kaba, which you have to strike a life for. This is just 2 energy. It's pretty much equivalent in some ways. But for Alliance, you get the battle power, you get the draw 2, and you get to deal damage to your opponent, which burn damage is a rare commodity in this game. And having on such a cheap card that goes all the way up to taking your opponent's 3rd life is absurd.
Yeah, the fact that number counts like this in Dragon Ball are inclusive makes this card insanely powerful. Honestly, I hate describing cards as pushed, but this is the most pushed card I've seen in a long time in this game. They put every effect they could on this thing, and it's worth every line of text.
Over the history of the game, you've looked at, when you look at just cards that just instantly deal damage, there's usually some opportunity for the opponent to respond to it, as in the case of like the Gohans, that if they KO a battle card, you deal damage. Your opponent has the ability to combo out of those if they need to. Or like in the case of Lightning Fast Hit, that's attached to a really high energy cost on the EX Evolve to play it. So this, for 2 energy, deals life, draws 2. What more could you want out of a card? Before we get to number 1, we've got a couple honorable mentions. Starting off, we'll look at the Set 3 Mighty Mask. This guy was influential towards making an extremely consistent aggro deck utilizing the turn 2 Vegeta, and was really what I would consider to be one of the first types of cards of its, of what it did, where you would play it and it would let you tutor multiple cards out of the deck. You'd be able to find your Goten, your Trunks, and add them to hand after you pressured with the card. So just absolutely fantastic. Then we've also got Paragus Rampage Trigger, another card absolutely vital to the success of the Set 6 Brawly BR deck. This card would play out your field card for free, plus you would be able to pop itself plus another battle card on the field, which oftentimes triggered and helped you climb your Brawly chain. No other card in the game really does what this card does. It's just not really a win or lose type situation if you don't see it. So for that reason, Rampage Trigger didn't quite cut the top 10.
And I wouldn't just feel right completing this list without adding Courageous Heart Yajirobe.
Yeah.
This card is not a very powerful card. It never really changed a meta. But this card come at a time where the game did not have a lot of counterplays. It didn't have a lot of set play type gameplay. This card, like Chapelle on this list, once you played it, your opponent had to play around this card. There wasn't a lot of spot removal that was cheap to pop this card to get it off field. That playing this for 2 energy in blue, you could just restand your energy, and now you got protection from whatever big body. Like I said, it did not change a meta. It didn't define anything, but it was such a strong card for the time that it come out, and there was nothing else like it.
And speaking of cards that are unlike anything else, we've got Tactical Victory Vegeta. To my knowledge, this is the most efficient way to remove a field card in the game. And with decks like Android 21, Blue Baby, King Cold, all of which have been popular recently with the Android 21 mill variant, Tactical Victory Vegeta is a great sideboard option if you're in green. And because it's only a sideboard option, we're just going to mention it here instead of giving it a spot on the top 10.
Also, we need more cards with Vegeta doing dirty fireworks.
I know, it's such a sick move.
Such a dope move.
And no top 10 list would be complete without a number 1, am I right? By and large, the best 2-drop the Dragon Ball game has ever seen. Fight me, I know I'm right. Is Great Apes on Goku's Saiyan Instincts introduced in Dragon Ball Draft Box 4. God, I think this taught everyone not to overestimate what can come out of draft boxes. When Draft Box 4 came out, a large portion of the community were like, these cards aren't good. They're just super undertuned. They're designed specifically for the draft format. And very quickly, people realized that was not the case with Saiyan Instincts. This card, for the longest time, was up in the $250 to $300 range. Because there's no other card in the game that for 2 energy lets you draw 2 cards. Plus, that was also a 5k combo itself.
And didn't cost a card from your hand to do it.
Yeah.
This being a fairly uninteractable source of resource for your opponent is what makes this card so good. And it fixed issues in decks that did not have enough draw power, because you just throw some monkeys in there, you're good. You don't have to worry about draw power anymore, because when you need the draw, it's there for you. You got it. You just have to pay 2 energy, which is a small cost to fix a lacking hand.
And this card increases the power of Flying Nimbus. It makes the green-yellow cell leader better just by virtue of existing. And something I do kind of want to say about this card, although I do actually enjoy it and think it deserves to be in the number 1 spot, I do have one gripe with it. And that I think an effect this generic should be on a common or uncommon. I don't know why Bandai chose to print this on a super rare in a set that was already split between new cards and reprints. I don't know why I'm trying to bash on Draft Box 4, but I see Draft Box 4 Dragon Ball on my screen right now, and it's just triggering.
The issues, I mean, that's a whole nother issue in itself. And I think that is the base gripe that everyone had against Draft Box 4, is this card was so good and it was so essential during those few formats, where if you didn't have it, don't even try to play those decks. because you just won't have the consistency to make it through an event. Like, it just, the fact that it shared its slot with a bunch of devalued super rares that were reprinted. It was in a short print form, so they just went from being incredibly. If you were the person that had the forethought to pick up 200 of these on the week that Draft Box 4 came out because no one was giving them any value, like, I need to shake your hand, because this card got super expensive and didn't see a reprint for almost a year and a half.
And
if
the reprints were roughly inaccessible too. They're still $40 or $50.
Yeah. And this is one of those cards, I don't know that we'll ever see an equivalent to this card again. And this is really the type of card that I could see them printing for every color. Kind of like every color has a counterattack, every color now has a counter. I could see this being the type of card that really every color should have, the ability to do this draw. Because truthfully, while it's not necessary in some decks, and it is a waste in some decks, the decks that can utilize this, utilize it to perfect, beautiful effect.
I think we've seen kind of a design shift with a lot of decks after this card was printed, where some decks have these built-in draw engines that are optional that you can run that will supplement a Saiyan Instincts.
Yes.
Where at the time that this card dropped, some decks did not have that option, and now they had Saiyan Instincts as their draw engine.
The lack of this card kept me off of Surge Cell during set 9. Because it was so, you had to run it at like a 4 of in Surge Cell, or Surge Cell could not keep up with the Invoker strategy. And like this card, I mean, you can't beat this card. This is the best 2-drop the game has ever seen.
And worst comes to worst, hard cast it and swing at your opponent. It's still a 15k threat.
It's still a 15k, and if they blow it up, you get to spend 2 energy next turn and draw you a couple cards. There's no loss there. But thanks, guys. We hope you've enjoyed this top 10. Stay tuned next. Probably in the next week or so, we're going to release the top 10 3-drops. If there's any type of top 10 video that you'd like to see, let us know in the comments below. Jimmy, last words?
Thank you for watching this Watch Mojo Top 10. Don't sue us.
Jake, last words?
If you want to win, you have to practice. And if you don't have time to practice, throw on an Attack on Productions video. We just did one probably last week, maybe? I don't know when this is coming out. About 1-drops top 10. So that one was really fun.
Yeah. Watch Mojo, please don't sue us. Read your cards. Know your plays. Let us make mistakes so you don't have to. I can already smell that cease and desist. Fluff out.